They placed a paper plate with cold leftovers in front of me at my own wedding reception. My new in-laws smirked as I stared at the scraps while everyone else ate prime rib. But when my husband stood up with his champagne glass, their faces went white. Here's why. If you've ever felt invisible or disrespected by people who thought they were better than you, this story will shock you. Stay until the end, because the twist will leave you speechless. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories that'll restore your faith in justice. I'm Anna, and 2 years ago I thought I was living in a fairy tale. I was 28, working as a kindergarten teacher in downtown Chicago, barely making ends meet, but absolutely loving what I did. My days were filled with finger paints, story time, and the kind of pure joy that only 5-year-olds can bring into your life. I lived in a tiny studio apartment, drove a car that was older than some of my students, and honestly, I was okay with that. I believed in love, kindness, and the idea that good things happen to good people. That's when I met Thomas. It was a Tuesday morning in October, and I was running late for work. I rushed into my usual coffee shop, already mentally preparing my apology for being tardy again, when I crashed straight into this man carrying 2 cups of coffee. Hot coffee went everywhere. On his expensive-looking suit, on my cardigan, on the floor. I was mortified. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," I stammered, grabbing napkins and trying to help clean up the mess I'd made. But instead of being angry, he just laughed. This genuine, warm laugh that made me look up at him properly for the first time. He was tall, with kind brown eyes, and this smile that made me forget I was supposed to be panicking. "Don't worry about it," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I have spare clothes at the office, but let me buy you a new coffee to replace whatever you dropped." That's how our story began. Over spilled coffee and his insistence on making sure I wasn't late for work. He waited with me while they made a fresh latte, asked about my job, and when I mentioned I taught kindergarten, his whole face lit up. Not in that patronizing way people sometimes react, but with genuine interest. "That must be amazing," he said. "Shaping young minds, being someone's first teacher, that's incredible." Most people, when they heard about my job, would nod politely and change the subject. Thomas asked me about my students, about what I loved most about teaching, about the challenges and the rewards. We talked for 20 minutes and I completely forgot about being late. The next morning, he was there again. Same coffee shop, same time, with 2 cups already ordered. "Thought I'd save us both from another collision," he said with that smile. That became our routine. Every morning for 3 weeks, we'd meet at the coffee shop, talk for however long we could, and then go our separate ways. I learned that he worked in business. He was vague about the details, and I didn't push. He seemed more interested in hearing about my world than talking about his own. He'd ask about little Johnny who struggled with reading, or how the Halloween party planning was going. He remembered everything I told him, every small detail about my life that most people would forget. When he finally asked me out on a proper date, I said yes, without hesitation. There was something so genuine about Thomas, so grounded despite the expensive clothes, and the way he never seemed worried about money. Our first date was perfect. Dinner at a cozy Italian place where we talked for hours, then a walk along the lakefront where he told me about growing up in Connecticut, and I shared stories about my childhood in Ohio. He never made me feel less than. When I mentioned that my dad worked construction and my mom was a nurse, he didn't flinch or change the subject. When we went out and I had to check the menu prices, he never made it awkward. He seemed to understand that we came from different worlds, but he never made me feel like that was a problem. 6 months later, he proposed. Not with some elaborate production or expensive restaurant, but during one of our morning coffee meetings. He got down on one knee right there in the coffee shop where we'd met, with all the regulars watching and cheering. The ring was beautiful, not flashy, but perfect for me. "Anna," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "you've made every day brighter since that first collision. Will you marry me?" Of course I said yes. I was head over heels in love with this man who saw me, really saw me, for who I was. That's when I met his family. The first dinner at his parents' house should have been a warning sign. Their home was a mansion in the most exclusive part of the city, the kind of place I'd only seen in movies. Thomas seemed nervous as we pulled up the circular driveway, which was unusual for him. "Just be yourself," he said, squeezing my hand. "They're going to love you." Margaret and William, Thomas's parents, were exactly what you'd expect from people who lived in a house that probably cost more than most people make in a lifetime. Polite but cold, with smiles that never quite reached their eyes. They asked about my background, my family, my job, but not in the warm, interested way Thomas did. It felt like an interview, like they were checking boxes on some invisible list. "A teacher," Margaret said when I mentioned my job, her voice carefully neutral. "How noble." The way she said noble made it sound like something you'd scrape off your shoe. Thomas's sister Caroline was even worse. She was a few years older than me, perfectly polished, and had this way of looking at me like I was some interesting specimen she'd found under a microscope. She asked pointed questions about where I went to college, where I grew up, what my parents did for work. Each answer seemed to confirm something she already suspected about me. "It must be so refreshing for Thomas," she said at one point, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "to date someone so down to earth, another way of saying beneath us." Thomas didn't seem to notice the subtle digs, or maybe he was choosing not to see them. He was proud when he introduced me, his arm around my waist, his face lighting up when he talked about me. He'd tell stories about my students, about the school projects I'd organized, about how dedicated I was to my work. His parents would nod politely, but I could see the judgment in their eyes. The wedding planning was when things really got complicated. Thomas wanted something small and intimate, maybe 50 people, somewhere meaningful to us both. But Margaret had other ideas. "The family has expectations," she said during one particularly tense meeting. "This isn't just about you two. It's about the family name, about our standing in the community." Suddenly, our small wedding became a production for 300 people. The venue changed from the beautiful garden location we'd chosen to the family estate, a sprawling mansion with perfectly manicured grounds that screamed old money. The menu went from the comfort food we'd requested to some elaborate multi-course affair I couldn't even pronounce. I felt like I was disappearing from my own wedding. Every decision was made by Margaret, with occasional input from Caroline. When I tried to voice my preferences, I was overruled with phrases like, "That's not how these things are done," or "You'll understand once you're part of the family." Thomas tried to advocate for me, but there was this weird dynamic where his family would bulldoze over him too. "Let Mother handle it," Caroline would say. "She knows what's best." And Thomas, who was so strong and confident in every other area of his life, seemed to shrink around his family. The night before the wedding, I almost called it off. I was staying at my parents' hotel. Margaret had insisted it was bad luck for Thomas and me to see each other before the ceremony, though I suspected she just wanted one last night to make sure I didn't contaminate her perfect event. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, staring at my wedding dress hanging in the closet, wondering if I was making a huge mistake. My mom found me crying. "Honey, what's wrong?" she asked, sitting beside me and rubbing my back the way she had when I was little. "I don't think his family likes me," I whispered. "I don't think they think I'm good enough for him." "Do you love him?" she asked simply. "More than anything." "And does he love you?" "I think so. I hope so." "Then that's all that matters," she said firmly. "Families can be complicated, but marriage is between two people, not two families. You marry Thomas, not his mother or his sister." She was right, of course. I loved Thomas, and I was pretty sure he loved me too. His family would just have to learn to accept me. The wedding day started perfectly. I woke up feeling beautiful and excited. My bridesmaids, my sister and 2 close friends from college, helped me get ready, and for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. The dress fit perfectly, my hair looked amazing, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw a bride who was ready to marry the man she loved. The ceremony was beautiful. Thomas looked handsome in his tuxedo, standing at the altar with tears in his eyes as I walked down the aisle. His vows were perfect. He talked about spilled coffee and morning conversations, about how I'd taught him to see the world differently, about building a life together filled with laughter and love. When he slipped the ring on my finger and said, "I do," I believed everything was going to be okay. The reception started well, too. The estate looked like something out of a magazine. Twinkling lights, gorgeous flowers, tables set with crystal and china that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Guests mingled on the terrace, champagne flowed freely, and everyone seemed to be having a wonderful time. That's when I noticed something odd. The seating chart had me at a table in the back corner, far from the head table where Thomas was sitting with his parents and Caroline. When I asked Margaret about it, she smiled that cold smile and said, "Oh, darling, we thought you'd be more comfortable with people your own age." The people at my table were nice enough, some distant cousins and family friends, but it felt wrong to be separated from my new husband at our own wedding reception. Thomas was busy with some kind of family business, shaking hands and having intense conversations with older men in expensive suits. Every time I tried to catch his eye, someone else would pull him aside. Then dinner was served. I watched as servers brought out beautiful plates to every table, perfectly arranged prime rib with roasted vegetables, everything looking like something from a fancy restaurant. The presentation was gorgeous, and I found myself getting excited to try this meal that had cost more than I wanted to think about. But when the server got to me, something was different. Instead of the elegant china plate everyone else had received, she set down a paper plate. A cheap, flimsy paper plate with what looked like leftovers. Cold slices of meat that might have been roast beef, congealed mashed potatoes with a skin on top, and some sad-looking vegetables that had clearly been sitting under a heat lamp too long. It looked like the kind of meal you'd scrape together from what was left in the kitchen after everyone else had eaten. I stared at the plate, convinced there had been some mistake. Maybe the server had gotten confused. Maybe this was meant for someone else. I looked around the table. Everyone else had the beautiful plated meals. I was the only one with scraps on a paper plate. The woman sitting next to me, one of Thomas's distant relatives, glanced at my plate and then quickly looked away, embarrassment flickering across her face. The man across from me cleared his throat uncomfortably. Everyone could see what was happening, but no one said anything. I felt my face burning with shame and confusion. This had to be a mistake. It had to be. I caught the server's attention as she walked by. "Excuse me," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think there might have been some confusion with my meal." She looked at my plate, then at me, then glanced nervously toward the head table where Margaret and Caroline were sitting. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Those were the instructions I was given. Instructions. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. I looked toward the head table and saw Margaret and Caroline watching me. They weren't even trying to hide their satisfaction. Margaret took a delicate bite of her perfect prime rib and smiled at me. Not a warm smile, but the kind of smile a cat gives a mouse before pouncing. The humiliation was overwhelming. Here I was, at my own wedding reception, surrounded by 300 people, and I'd been served literal scraps like I was some unwanted guest who'd wandered in from the street. The paper plate made it even worse, as if I didn't deserve real dishes like everyone else. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to run to the bathroom and cry, or better yet, run to my car and drive away from this nightmare. But I was trapped at my own wedding, wearing a white dress that suddenly felt like a costume, surrounded by people who were pretending not to notice that the bride was being treated like garbage. Where was Thomas? I scanned the room frantically, looking for my new husband, the one person who should have been protecting me from this humiliation, but he was nowhere to be seen. Someone mentioned he was handling some urgent family business in his father's study. I sat there, staring at the cold food on my paper plate, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and instead I was learning exactly what my new family thought of me. I wasn't just unwelcome, I was beneath their notice, worth less than the servers who were treating me with more respect than my own in-laws. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I heard the distinctive sound of a champagne flute being tapped with a knife. The room gradually fell silent as people turned their attention toward the sound. Thomas had returned and was standing at the head table, champagne glass raised, looking more serious than I'd ever seen him. His father was beside him, looking uncomfortable, while Margaret and Caroline watched with smug expressions on their faces. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thomas said, his voice carrying clearly across the room, "thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate what should be the happiest day of my life." Should be. Those words sent a chill down my spine. "Before we go any further, I need to share something with all of you," Thomas continued, his eyes finding mine across the room. "Something that will explain why my beautiful wife Anna is sitting over there with a paper plate of leftovers while the rest of you enjoy the dinner you deserve." The silence in the room was deafening. I could feel every pair of eyes turning to look at me, then back at Thomas. Margaret's smug smile was starting to fade. "You see?" Thomas said, his voice getting stronger. "I've been conducting a little experiment over the past year. I wanted to see how my family, the people who raised me, who taught me about values and character, would treat the woman I love when they thought she had nothing to offer them." Caroline's face had gone pale. William was staring at his son like he'd never seen him before. "I let you believe that Anna was just a simple teacher from a working-class family. I let you think that she was beneath us, that she was some kind of gold digger who was only interested in our money. And you know what? You showed me exactly who you really are." Thomas's voice was getting louder now, and there was an edge to it I'd never heard before. "You humiliated her. You excluded her, you treated her like she was less than human, and tonight, at our wedding reception, you served my wife scraps on a paper plate while you dined on prime rib." I could see Margaret frantically trying to catch Thomas's attention, making small gestures for him to stop talking. But Thomas wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. "What you don't know," Thomas said, turning back to the room, "is that I'm worth $2.8 billion?" The room erupted in shocked murmurs. I felt like someone had just punched me in the stomach. $2.8 billion? My Thomas, who met me for coffee every morning, who never made me feel bad about checking menu prices, was worth billions. "That's right," Thomas continued, his voice cutting through the noise. "I'm the CEO of Meridian Holdings. I own 17 companies across 4 countries. I'm worth more money than most people can imagine, and my family knew this. They've been living off my money in houses I bought them, driving cars I paid for years." Margaret stood up, her face flushed. "Thomas, what are you doing?" "I'm telling the truth, Mother." "Something you seem to have forgotten how to do." Thomas's voice was ice cold. "I let you think Anna was poor because I wanted to see if you had any decency left. I wanted to see if the values you claimed to have raised me with meant anything when they were tested." He turned to look at Caroline. "I wanted to see if my sister, who talks constantly about charity and helping others, would show kindness to someone she thought was beneath her station." Caroline was shaking her head, tears starting to form in her eyes. "Thomas, we didn't know—" "Exactly." Thomas slammed his hand on the table, making the champagne glasses jump. "You didn't know, and that's when your true character showed. When you thought there was nothing to gain from being kind to Anna, you chose cruelty instead." The room was dead silent now. 300 people watching a family implode in real time. "Well, here's what's going to happen," Thomas said, his voice deadly calm. "As of tomorrow morning, all of your trust funds are canceled. The houses I bought you, you have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. The cars, the credit cards, the country club memberships, all of it gone." William finally found his voice. "Son, you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life, Dad." "I've also rewritten my will. Everything, every penny, every company, every asset, now goes to Anna and our future children." I felt like I was in a dream. A very strange, surreal dream where my kindergarten teacher life had somehow collided with a soap opera. Thomas was a billionaire. His family had been testing me, and now he was testing them. And somehow, I had gone from being served scraps to being worth billions, all in the span of one toast. "Anna," Thomas said, his voice softening as he looked at me, I'm sorry I put you through this. I needed to know who they really were before I decided whether they deserved to be part of our life. Now I know." He walked over to my table, took the paper plate of cold food, and handed it to a server. Then he offered me his arm. "Would you like to join me at our table, Mrs. Anna? I believe you deserve better than scraps." As I stood up and took his arm, I could hear the chaos starting behind us. Margaret was crying, Caroline was trying to explain herself to anyone who would listen, and William was having what looked like a heated argument with several of the other family members. But I didn't care about any of that. My husband, my billionaire husband who had somehow managed to keep that particular detail from me for an entire year of dating and engagement, was leading me to the head table, where a server was already setting down a proper place setting with real china and a meal that looked like it belonged in a 5-star restaurant. "I know you probably have questions," Thomas said quietly as we sat down. "Questions?" That was an understatement. "Just one," I said. "Do you actually like spilled coffee, or was that whole meet-cute thing planned too?" He laughed, and it was that same genuine laugh that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. The spilled coffee was completely real. Best accident of my life. Can you believe how quickly people's attitudes change when money's involved? I went from being served scraps to inheriting billions in one toast. The woman who couldn't afford to eat at nice restaurants was suddenly worth more than most small countries. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated because of your background? Subscribe for more incredible stories of justice served. And remember, sometimes the quiet ones are the most powerful. See you in the next video.